About a week and a half ago, the legislative session for 2013 ended in the state of Indiana, and in this edition of WJTS in.form, we're going to talk with Mark Messmer, who is District 63 State Representative. And actually, there's so much to talk about, we're going to do two different shows. We're doing a show tonight, and we'll continue with the show and talking to Mark tomorrow night as well on 18 WJTS. Mark, welcome to the show.
Great, thank you, Bill.
Well, Mark, let's start this show off, and let's do this whole show on the budget.
Okay.
The budget has been passed, and every 2 years, there's a budget has passed. Okay.
Right.
Let's talk about what you felt was good with the budget,
Okay.
and let's talk about what you may have felt was bad with the budget.
Well, obviously, the budget is our only constitutional requirement that we ever deal with, as a General Assembly. So we're called by the Constitution to meet every 2 years to pass a budget. So that's priority one on what we do and why we're there. So and I was very pleased, with the overall budget. And the last 4 years, it was flatlining or cutting and not very pleasant to be part of. So this was one, that was really kind of a catch-up year.
So Indiana's doing pretty good financially.
Doing well,
Okay.
doing well. I mean, obviously we'd like to see our unemployment or, down, rates down and actual numbers of people employed up, and things would even be better. But all in all, things were, very positive for the outlook for the next 2 years. Probably the most significant components of the budget, we're adding about $350 million into additional K-12 education spending. It'll be a 2% increase in starting the budget year that goes from July 1 this year, to next year June 30, and then an additional 1% the year after that to the base, and then also in year 2 for schools that are performing, high performing schools, will have an additional possibility of another 0.5% increase to high performing schools. So potential for a 3.5% increase, during that time frame, and puts us at the highest level of education spending in our state's history on K-12 education. So
Many people, I'm sure, are very pleased with that.
very pleased, yeah. I mean, obviously, that doesn't mean every school is getting, 2% and 1%. That then, a lot of what'll factor into that is, is your school population increasing or decreasing, but the dollars per student, will be reflected that most schools will get more money. Okay. If you're in a declining population, or if prior to about 3 years, I guess 2 years ago, that during that budget cycle, there were some schools at that point that were getting, nearly double the cost, the dollars per student as what we were here locally. And some of those schools are in what they call a transition, to base down. Some are transitioning up, some are transitioning down. So that also affects the dollar per average. I think I had one school corporation in my district that's on the transition down. But they knew that. They knew that 2 years ago. They knew it this year. And they're really almost, they're almost to the end of the big changes in that transition period. So all in all, very positive for K-12 education. Higher education is getting 3% more dollars as well. And really on a very positive note, University of Southern Indiana, who was the lowest per school in the state on per average reimbursement from the state on their tuition support, is getting their baseline increase $2 million per year more. They were hoping for 5, which would have put them kind of in the average. They did go ahead and give them $2 million more this year and next year, which is a big shot in the arm for them. And then Vincennes University, we were able to get into the budget a $6 million funding for infrastructure improvements on the campus over at VU. So 2 nice plugs for higher ed in our neck of the woods, which was good. Also, I guess the biggest 2 components we have in the state are schools and roads. I mean, they kind of dominate the spending. Schools, I think by the time you factor in higher ed and K through 12, it's about 60% of the budget. The next biggest chunk is road funding, and made some significant structural changes to how we're going to fund roads over the next 2 years, and really out into the future up through 2020. Kind of set the trend for us. Pretty far away out. Prior to this year, and they probably started it 15, 20 years ago. Nobody ever actually looked when the fuel excise tax, the state has 18 cents a gallon that they collect that's supposed to be going to road work. Well, up until this year, we had 12 cents of that going to road funding, and 6 cents of the gas tax was being used to fund BMV and state police, which are there to basically support road work. But we're taking all of the fuel excise tax on gasoline and diesel, and it's all going to roads, which is we were spending about $280 million a year on road work. That alone put another $140 million a year into the road funding account. And then on top of that, they're going to take about 20% of the sales tax off of fuel that's collected and allocate that to road funding as well. So between those two pieces, it'll be an additional $215 million a year that'll go into basically INDOT and city and county road funding. The state, prior to that, historically always has. They've gotten 40 or 53% of that funding mechanism, and the counties and cities have gotten 47%. So with that, that'll be a nice shot in the arm, for all of the local and state road funding as far as maintenance for bridges and highway maintenance. And then on top of that, they're going to allocate an additional $200 million a year for basically new projects, what they're calling Major Moves 2020. So it'll fund projects like the I-69 from Bloomington to Indianapolis, other I-70 improvements that they're planning on doing, and potentially, one of the studies that's going to happen this year is prioritization of other new projects where we're hoping I-67 will fit into that mix. But that $200 million allocated for additional road work is above and beyond what we've done in the past. So very nice structural changes.
And this just basically changes what's done with the tax that's currently collected. It's not going to raise the tax.
No.
You're talking about more money going to places, but it's because it's being reallocated, not because there's an additional tax.
Correct.
Oh, good,
Yep.
okay.
And we're taking the BMV and state police and paying for those out of the general fund, just general fund budgeting, which is really where it belonged. Probably years ago there was excess money in the excise tax account, and so they made the shift sometime in the past, but now we're going to put that money where it needs to be. And out of the other $200 million, for future road improvements, that's coming from a general fund allotment, out of the general budget, not coming from the excise tax, but they're planning for future growth and future projects and planning ahead and starting it now. So very major shifts in how we're going to pay for roads, but well overdue, and glad to see that happening. Let's see, what other budget items? Oh, well, and some key components about the budget is it's fiscally balanced. Each year of this year and next year's budget, we plan to take in about $100 million more than we spend. So it'll allow a little bit of if there's a little slide or some months that don't come in, that we've got a little structural surplus, built into each calendar year. Also within that, we're putting $150 million a year into what they call the tuition reserve account. So our K through 12 education spending, if there's a downturn in the economy, we don't have to automatically then go back to schools and say, stop, or we're going to cut your allocation by 2 or 3%. That we're going to put into that reserve account and get that built back up to where, if there's a future recession, which there probably will be at some point, money is in there to be able to keep them basically funded at the amount that we adopt at this point in the legislature. So good moves on that. And at the end of the biennium, it'll maintain about a $2 billion reserve account, which is about 13% of our overall spending. So that keeps it at a level where, we don't want to spend that down, and then if there's a downturn, end up having to raise taxes or do draconian cuts to programs. It keeps a modest level of reserves in there for rainy day funding.
How many states are able to do that? To where
I'd say there's probably only a half a dozen, in the country. We're one of, I think, 8 states that have a AAA bond rating that goes, right along hand in hand with that. Also, in part of the budget, we're paying off, bonds. We're paying off old debt. We're paying cash for about $200 million worth of infrastructure, university projects. Paying cash for those projects, not putting them on a bond, which that solidifies that AAA credit rating. That AAA credit rating then reduces interest amounts that if a community or the state, does have, if there's bonding that needs to happen for public projects, it keeps those bond rates low and saves taxpayers money again. So very, very fiscally sound, very conservative on how we're spending, how we're paying down debt, paying cash for projects.
Indiana's doing well.
That's the stage, for down the road.
Now, if Indiana's doing so good that we got a tax cut on our personal income tax, but it's 5%, which sounds, I don't want to belittle it, but it sounds like a lot of money, but it really is not what people are thinking.
Well, the income tax rate in Indiana is 3.4%. We're going to reduce that by 5%. We're going to do it in a couple of steps. The first will be January 1st of 2015. We'll take it from 3.4 to 3.3. And then 2 years later, we'll take it from 3.3 to 3.23. It'll be, stepped in a 5% reduction. It'll average for the normal household about $2 to $3 a week. I mean, will it be earth-shattering amount? No, but if it's money you don't need and you can reduce it in a fiscally sound way, if you don't need it, don't take it.
But at least it is a tax reduction when normally we're talking about a tax increase.
And one thing we did this year, we had set up 2 years ago a phase out of inheritance taxes, and people think, oh, that only helps rich guys. No, I had a community right here in DuBois County that a family approached me at a town hall meeting in January that I had here and said, is there anything that can be done with inheritance tax? And it could be a 100-acre, 200-acre family farm, where they don't have a lot of cash, in the estate. It's primary property, and the estate taxes, tax that. I think if I'm correct, was a 39% rate. So you take a couple hundred acres, at the assessed value now is probably going to be an average of $15,000 to $20,000 an acre, and you have to come up with cash to pay that. A lot of times, almost always, what they end up having to do is either sell all or part of the farm, to pay the taxes on that. And it's money. You're taxing assets that have been taxed already once. We were one of the very few states that still had an inheritance tax, and we wiped it out completely and made it retroactive to January 1st this year. So that's a tax reduction for potentially anybody and everybody who's going to have an estate, that gets transferred from one generation to the next.
Is there something about the budget you didn't like?
Well, in the budget, probably not so much. Maybe individual bills.
Well, and we'll talk about those tomorrow night. Okay.
Yeah. I think overall, the budget was. Would it be nice to have another, $200 to $300 million to put into, pick your project? And there were some tax credit programs that I wanted to see adopted, that would have helped maybe some economic development incentives or ideas that we had worked on. Those didn't get funded, which would have been, maybe some additional tax cuts. Tax credits usually end up, resulting in tax cuts, and we couldn't get any. We had one that was called the New Markets Tax Credit Program. Would have been a great shot in the arm for venture capital that would have got pumped into the state immediately. Probably to the tune of about $200 million of additional venture capital. It had a fiscal impact of about $10 million a year, and we tried, and we pushed, and had it to the final week of conference committee negotiations, and that was one that they dropped off. So disappointed in that, but don't worry, we'll bring that one back next year. So.
Well, Mark, we're going to have you back again tomorrow night at the same time, and we'll be talking about some of the individual bills that Mark felt good about and maybe some that he didn't like as much. So join us tomorrow night for WJTS Inform. And Mark, thank you very much for talking about the budget. Yep. It's good to know that Indiana is doing well.
Yep.
All right, this has been WJTS Inform. We are local people watching local people.